My name is Julie Wilson, and I am Penguin Random House's Senior Manager of Digital Production Platforms and the co-creator of Ahab. In our continued effort to support and empower the acting community, I'm excited to step back from co-hosting the Ahab Breakdown today and give this episode over to a panel of LGBTQ actors who will share their own personal experiences in the voiceover industry. Diverse and inclusive casting is one of Ahab's core values, and it is our hope that today's episode will launch many more conversations related to LGBTQ identifying actors and representing LGBTQ characters throughout the voiceover industry. On that note, I'll ask our moderator for today's episode, Ron Butler, to please join me on the virtual stage.
Hello.
Hello.
I was going to say good morning, but I'm not sure what time it is everywhere, so I'm just going to say hello.
It's morning, afternoon, evening, depending upon where you are.
I'm so happy to be here, especially with this topic, this very salient issue. So thank you for inviting. Thank you to Penguin Random House and Ahab for inviting us and having and hosting this conversation. I'm thrilled about that. My name is Ron Butler, but my friends and colleagues call me Ronnie, so please call me Ronnie. And I'm going to be moderating today's panel. And I think I'll just let everyone introduce themselves. We'll go around and then we'll just jump in. We all probably look different in each other's grids, so I'll point to you and I'll say, Emily Woo Zeller. We've got two Emilys.
Hi, I am Emily Woo Zeller. I don't know what else should I be saying here in our
I meant to say how long I've been narrating. I think that's a good thing for everyone to at least include, because in the continuum of this conversation with regard to where sort of LGBTQI identification has happened over the last several years, there's going to be a differing perspective depending on how long you've been in this kind of business. So I've been narrating for about 7 years. Emily Woo Zeller.
Awesome. Okay, let me do some quick math. I have been narrating for 13 years.
Woo! Yes. Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Henning. I identify as gay and queer. I am super proud to be an LGBTQ narrator and tell those stories. And I just had my 5th anniversary of narrating.
Thank you, Daniel. The other Emily Lawrence.
Hi, I'm Emily Lawrence. I've been narrating. April is my 10-year anniversary. And actually, I'm hitting 450 audiobooks like this month. So it's cool.
Thanks, Emily. Shaan.
Hey there, I'm Shaan Dasani. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I'm a little baby in this space. So I come from a film production background first, or originally, and then acting for camera and stage. And then I just started in audiobooks last year. So in March, it'll be 1 year.
Welcome. Dani.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dani Martineck. I use they, them pronouns, and I am just a little bit older than Shaan in this industry. I've been narrating for 4 years now, which shocks me, but it's already here, 4 years.
Welcome, Dani. And Vikas.
Hello, I am Vikas Adam. I've been narrating for 10 years now. It just hit me. I think this is the month that I actually started. So
wow,
we are full 10. Thank you. Happy decade. And I primarily identify as he, but I have recently been exploring the moon sign of they for myself. So the rising of the moon sign. So yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you, Vikas, and thank you everyone for being here today. I feel I want to say, I don't know if I'm probably the only one old enough to remember this, but on TV when I was like, I guess in college was when it started, when whenever they would have any kind of LGBTQIA plus content, any kind of queer content on a TV show, they would always have the special voiceover before the episode, and they would say, and now, very special episode of Ahab Breakdown. So that's what we're about to have, a very
Yeah.
special episode. It's interesting. One of the there were questions that were submitted for this panel, and one of the first questions was, is it necessary to declare your persuasion? That's how they worded it, but is it necessary to declare your identity? And it's interesting that as we went around, some of us did and some of us did not, just naturally. And I want to invite you all to comment on that as in terms of your work as a voiceover artist and as a narrator specifically. Have you felt career-wise that it was important or imperative for you to declare your identity?
You want to call on someone?
Thinking.
You want to call on someone? Or?
Vikas, you spoke up. Why don't you jump in?
It's funny. I immediately go to the opposite of it, and I remember a time when it was not cool to declare. Not so much about, so to answer your question, I don't know if it's so much about declaring. I remember when we were told not to declare. Neutralize your ethnicity as much as possible. Definitely you straight, because if you are not straight, you are not going to be working. And I'm talking the entertainment industry, and that's where my mindset was, and that's where it used to be. So to be able to see the doors opening and the arms opening and being invited in is, I mean, that's huge. And I'm still like taking it in.
Mm. Yeah, I remember first being in entertainment, having that message told to me very strongly by my representation, and this is living in New York and being a theater actor, right? And so I carried that with me. But what was freeing for me, at least in terms of narration, when I stepped into this world, I was at the point where I was like, you know what? I don't care if I don't get the work. Fine, I'm done with that. This is who I am, and so it was very freeing. But it was a different experience when I stepped into narration about 7 years ago. What about others? What's your experience been?
Well, I actually specifically started telling people how I identified because in order to support efforts for authentic casting, because I had started getting cast. I had been cast a few times in queer romance and things like that by people who I had never told. And so either they had excellent gaydar or they it wasn't a focus. And I know that I had been cast with co-narrators who were not queer. And so I think that representation in casting is really important to me in a lot of different aspects. And I kind of decided that one of the big barriers to that with the queer community is that it's not always very easy to tell who we are. And so I decided to start telling people in an effort to aid that and to support a general effort for making it easier to cast roles appropriately, and also to voice my ardent belief that doing so is important. And so that before that, I hadn't really told anyone, but that is what pushed me to start feeling like I should be more open about it.
Emily, how did you do that? Did you actually just say to a producer or to a publisher, hey, I identify as queer or pan, or how did you do that?
So actually what I did was I started feeling, because I believe in this in regards to several identities I have. I'm also Jewish and I have a disability, and I feel like it's important in a lot of ways to cast people authentically in a lot of situations. And I understood that it was difficult for casting to always be able to find that. And I didn't at the time feel like casting was really asking or giving me an opportunity. They tended to ask about ethnicity a lot, but not other things. And so I created a Google survey for the community to fill out, and I just kind of sent it around various Facebook groups and was like, hey, if you identify as anything, fill this out, and I'm gonna, have this resource available to people who cast in our community. And then I started reaching out to producers at various publishers to be like, hey, I created this list, and in that email, I explained, I did this because you probably have no idea that I identify as agender / non-binary, or that I'm pan. And I want you to be able to find this information, and here was the best way I could think to help. And that started a lot of conversations, including with Julie, actually, about how to facilitate that. But so I kind of came out in an effort to be like, hey, me, but also like 100 other people. So that's how I did it.
I'm curious, Shaan and Dani being newer to the industry. When you stepped in, did you step into the industry with that identifier, front and forward immediately? What was your experience?
So I discovered more appropriate words for my gender kind of just as I was entering my 30s, and I was just a few years out from that when someone I knew in the theater world saw me in a play and said like, hey, wait, I have a book for you. Can you audition for this book? We have there's a kid who is their gender is never specified, and I think it would be, your voice would be a cool fit for this. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And so really it kind of just happened that way. And that's one of the things that I want to, if I can take it in a bit of a weird direction from the initial question.
Sure.
Of course we can come back. Words, and now I have to remember where I was going before. This always happens.
You're going to take it in a different direction. You're going to talk about an experience.
I'm trying to think of just the thing that, like, the more you think about it, the more you forget it. We talked a little bit earlier, like we kind of met previously just to jam and like meet each other, about the vulnerability that comes with disclosing more aspects of who you are in particularly high stakes situations, which these are hiring situations. Let's be real. This is, for us, these are jobs. This is a passion, but this is also a job. So every conversation like this is a hiring conversation. And that's why like all these laws have been passed and all these, that's the whole situation, the whole thing. But the more you open yourself in these kinds of conversations, there is that potential for great joy and being seen and being celebrated and your voice being the right fit for something. But then there's also, and I've had some personal experiences like this, the potential that you are going to bring your full self and it's still not going to be exactly what is wanted in that particular moment. And that is pretty painful, especially if that then leads to some backtracking. Let's say we're in a situation where there's a character who is trans or who is sort of in this gender fluid area. And so they'll bring someone like me in who has some experience, but has not been working for like 13 years. And then something completely outside of our control makes it so that I'm not the voice. And then the next voice is someone who does have more experience, who can deliver on these other things that were wanted, but then you lose that authenticity. And that can be particularly hard to process and to integrate and to take, and to really kind of come to peace with, in a sense of, oh, it wasn't really about me, when you're being so personal in that way. But I also wanted to bring that up just to also reiterate the great joy that can come from this. But like I'm sure the questioner had in their mind, this is such a personal decision, and it's gone overall extremely well for me. I am extremely lucky, and because of many of the different identities I hold, I'm in a very privileged position. So I'm not saying this one experience has not ruined anything. It's just given me more life to wrestle with and learn from,
Yeah, I just want to, yes, I'm going to let you jump in, Daniel. I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for sharing that with us, because, well, for being vulnerable in this moment with us. So I really appreciate that. And I think you're right. I think that the part of the reason the question was probably asked was, not, what is the risk? Is there risk? And is there reward? And there are both, and there can be both. In many different identifiers, but in this one, it seems in particular, right? Daniel, I'm sorry, you were really nodding like you wanted to jump in.
Oh yeah, no, it's first of all, I started narrating 5 years ago, but 4 years ago is when I really started introducing myself, and to publishers and casting people. And I realized at that time that I saw this shift that was happening from, as Emily was saying, it didn't matter who was doing the queer romances. It didn't matter who was telling those LGBT stories before. And then it was starting to matter. So I kind of arrived at just this moment where I said, okay, well, this is not going to go backwards from this point. So I actually have, I stopped acting for a long time while I ran a theater here in LA, and I became a gay rights activist and was recognized by the state of California and whatever. And so I couldn't not be gay anymore. I mean, I was, it was just out on the internet. It's on the internet. It's done. I'm gay. So I decided to use that as as part of the conversation about me. And as I introduced myself to people, I told them that I had been recognized by the state for my work in LGBT. So I wanted to become an LGBTQ narrator. I didn't want to be entirely that, but I wanted to be able to have my voice be in that conversation. And then as I was having that conversation with a sort of a major, producer, I said, well, I'd love to do LGBTQ stuff. And she said, well, thank you for saying that, because this is job related, we can't ask you that. So, and it's just at this moment where the industry wants to be using authentic voices to tell queer stories. But if you don't tell them you're an authentic queer voice, then you're not going to be considered for that. So now you gotta say it somehow or another if you want that to be part of who you are as a narrator, I think.
You don't have to be out publicly, but I think most people in the community are pretty good at being like, hey, I am this, but like my parents don't know, please don't put it in the marketing, but then you could still be, I just wanted to make that distinction. You can still be cast as long as people in the industry know. You don't have to be public about it.
I saw you nodding, Emily, so I wanted to give you a chance to jump in.
I mean, I know I'm loving what everybody's saying. I'm loving hearing from everybody. My own experience has been extremely fortunate. Just by a cross section of, where I was born and the time I was born and circumstances of growing up and all such, I've been granted a certain level of immunity. I identify as bisexual, and I have been out about that for a really long time, including to my parents, although that came much later. That was the hardest one to come out to. But because of all of the things where I, was raised in the time and all of that stuff, it wasn't as scary for me to be able to be out in the world about being bisexual and as identifying as a woman, cis woman, right? And also being bisexual. That's different from being a cis man who identifies as bisexual. So it's all these things. So for me, I don't know how much people actually knew early on about what my sexual identity was in terms of casting. I have done queer stories with queer people in them for a long time. And I don't know how much of that was informed or not, but because it was always just like, yeah, it's a thing. If you talk to me for long enough, you'll figure it out or you'll find out, So it's very gray for me when that happened. And I know that I'm very lucky in that sense. So I'm really heartened by the direction that the industry has taken, where it is safer to talk about who you are, and in fact encouraged, and we want more people, we want more diversity of all kinds. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say about that. And also I want to echo Dani that it is a legal thing. They cannot ask you what your identities are. It has to come from you and how you present yourself. So yeah.
I will say that as you were talking, Emily, I thought, of all the segments of the entertainment industry that I've been in, this has been the most inviting with regard to that embrace of diversity and inclusion. I just want to acknowledge that because I feel very blessed about that. Shaan,
sorry, right. One last thing I just want to add is that I would love, I don't know, I just think it's interesting also to talk about intersecting identities, right? So like we can, Emily Lawrence was saying, right? She's also Jewish and has a disability, and I'm also mixed race and Chinese and right?
Right.
That the way that these things I just think that that's very interesting, and that may be particularly powerful. Like I've had the opportunity to be able to narrate stories that were specifically East and Southeast Asian and queer. Like that's a very specific intersection, right? That we need.
Right.
And female and cis identifying female, right? Like all of those things. So
when you said that, my memory went back to the first time when I got, my dishwasher is singing. Okay, it's done. And my mind went back to my first speed dating, which was in person. And, I was like, okay, they can see that I'm Black, so I don't need to talk about that. But I immediately said, the thing that I talked about was being from the Caribbean, right? But I didn't go, and I'm gay. Could you give me some gay books? Like, I didn't do that. Whereas if I were going into speed dating in APAC in 2 weeks, that would be on my list, right? And that's the difference. And that's the difference in where we're at, I feel. Okay, Shaan, finally.
Finally, no, I'm kidding. No, I think it's great to like kind of hear what everyone has to say. Again, I'm newer to the space of audiobooks, but I think we are kind of fortunate to be at this time where folks are looking for authenticity in casting. And it's not a moment. I think it's a movement. We are now moving forward, and I think we're going to continue doing that. So in terms of, is it necessary? I think it's subjective. For me, I only started acting when I was, as I was physically transitioning. I identify as trans male. And one of the first questions I had was, when I was looking for representation, was, should I disclose? Because my first representation was on camera commercial, where it's not really about, commercials are more about the product and, not about authentic representation for the most part. It's about a look. And so I was like, well, should I disclose to my representatives? I just wasn't sure. It was 2014. It was kind of pre-Laverne Cox. So the industry was still kind of moving, and I decided to go ahead and disclose, but that was a personal choice. And also I had to ask myself, how comfortable am I right now in my skin? And so I had to sit with that a little bit. Also to note, prior to that, my first acting gig, I have to shout out Daniel Henning here. My first acting gig was a theater production through the Young Playwrights Festival, which Daniel runs. And it was a very sweet play called The Not Lesbians, and they were looking to cast a trans male. And so I think I was one of 2 people that auditioned. The other person was my dear friend who came out of the audition and said, this is your role, because he was just not available. and so I got it and loved it. But that also says something about, at the time, how many folks were actually, how was casting accessing people, and how many folks were actually acting at that time? How many trans male actors were there at that time? Which I'm so happy to say that there are many more today. What are we, 8 years later? There are many more today. And so it's the same thing in the audiobook space, like getting to see like more and more folks and hearing those voices, I think makes a huge difference. So I'm really excited for the time that we're in. My first experience, I kind of stumbled in like Dani. I came in a year ago, And it was my friend James C. wrote a book called All Kinds of Other. And that was my first book. And I don't know what it's called, but I guess it's co-narrated. There were two lead characters, and one who identified as trans, masculine, kind of teenage, half South Asian, you know. So there were a lot of like intersectional identities there. But that was my first way in, and James knew me and asked me to audition for it. So that's kind of how I found my way in.
And I just want to say actually, and in that time, Shaan, thank you for that. That's lovely for you to say that. We worked really hard to find you. There just wasn't a pool. There wasn't a way to find trans actors at that moment. And nobody was even really doing that in the way that they're trying to do that today. And so it was hard to find the actors. And I mention that just to say, the more you are vocal about who you are with these people, the easier it will be for them to find you. You know,
I can recall, I mean, and it was more than a year ago, but between a year and 2 years ago, getting emails and phone calls from producers and publishers asking me, I've got a book with a trans woman. Do you know any trans women narrators? And I did not at the time. You know, they were the ball had been rolling at that point, and they'd begun trying. I want to flip it to the opposite side of that. Well, Emily Lawrence, were you going to jump in and say something?
It sounds like we're actually in the same place, because I was going to say that while I do think the industry has come a long way, and I do agree that the audiobook industry is generally a very welcoming and warm industry, and my experience overall has been very great, it's kind of not all great. And I would also like to talk about some of the work that does still need to be done, because I have had a number of very negative experiences where members of the community, honestly, especially among fellow narrators, were not supportive of queer representation in casting. I've had many very upsetting conversations where people have quibbled about who really deserves authentic representation, if it's more important for some groups to get it than others. Like I've had people say to me, well, I think only Jews should narrate Holocaust books, but otherwise Jewish representation doesn't matter. You know, things like that, where people are kind of deciding for people what exactly they deserve in terms of equity and representation. And while I think that those conversations, even in just last year, have come a long way, I have personally had some very upsetting ones, and I do feel like that needs to be acknowledged.
That's upsetting.
So I was going to say, absolutely. I mean, that's true that's definitely true in, I've experienced that even with regard to, race, even with regard to, being Black. Well, this book, shouldn't it just be the best voice? To what extent, and this is a more of an umbrella topic, but it applies here, right? To what extent does authenticity with regard to background, cultural understanding, cultural experience, play into, whether or not someone should be given a book? And it's the same thing that you're talking about, Emily. People saying, well, I'm not gay, but all the stuff happening in this book is a human experience, and I experience all these emotions. Why can't I read this book, right? Is the argument, and it's still playing out. So yeah, there's still work to be done, still education to be done. Go ahead, Vic.
Yeah, I think what this brings up in me, and it makes me remember one of the reasons why I, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, Ron, why I felt a need to hide myself, why I had to subscribe to the straight or completely neutral, non-sexual, as neutralized race-wise as possible, because yes, we are here as audiobook narrators, and when it boils down to it, it is about the work. How are we to earn a living? How are we to practice our craft? And so for me, I think it's very important to acknowledge that for the longest time, the default blank canvas was cis, white, and straight. And if you were those three, then if you were given the platform to be able to explore everything as an actor, you were the blank slate. And it was okay. And you were given the opportunity to go outside of your boxes. And so there was the fear of, if I disclose and come out and present myself in all my glory, those are the boxes I'm only going to be able to play. And so one of the things that I am always trying to encourage and want to encourage the entertainment industry to do, and I think that in my experience right now, audiobooks has been doing for me, is the new blank canvas does not just have to be those three straight, white, straight, cis. Now the blank canvas can be queer, gay, brown, trans, insert whatever skin color, insert whatever race, because in the end we are still actors. And if we are able to not just play ourselves, we are able to play other people too, and other creatures. And that is, in my experience, audiobooks, which is one of the reasons I'm still here and love it and here full out, is because I received that opportunity to be able to step out of myself and be that actor.
Yeah, I think that was really beautifully said, Vic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally
very well
agree.
said.
And I just want to echo, sorry.
No, go ahead, Emily.
I just want to echo what Shaan said, that this is a continuum, that it's a movement, right? There's not just there wasn't any start and stop. There's going to be some backward steps and some forward steps, and that's just how it is. But that, and also to what Dani had talked about too, I know that we're talking about Ahab here, but there's another, it's called Queer Academy, and it's outside of audiobooks. It's for other voiceover, that they are interested in training people to get up the acting chops, so that the two things, where there are those of us who have been actors for our lives, right, or for a long time, and then there are those who haven't, and who have the identity, and who we want to, and who have the desire to become actors, right, but never felt safe to do that or had the opportunity to do that, and to bring the two together. So we're in a moment where we're having to bring the two together, right? We don't have enough of a pool of diverse people to both fulfill the requirements of a performance, technically speaking, and also to represent appropriately. So I think it's a beautiful thing. It's also kind of painful, right? Like it's hard for the people who are having to step into these really big shoes when they have less experience, right? And then it's also harder for people who are casting to be saying, well, we really need to have the job be able to be performed well, in addition to having appropriate representation.
I think
And it's a hard job. Sorry,
It's
Emily.
a hard job. It's a hard job.
it is hard. I think, I mean, there is definitely aspects of this, of like when it's hard to find somebody to fulfill the both the identities in that are represented, and also, especially when you're trying to find, well, I need somebody who is both, intersex and also Latina, and whatever, like it can get very difficult. And I totally understand that, and I sympathize with people who are casting, but there are definitely times where it's very easy to find somebody and an effort is not put in. And I think that this is true. I mean, how many times have people mentioned in narrator Facebook groups, a producer just reached out to me to play somebody who's Black, and I'm obviously not. Is anybody who's Black like available at this time? Like that. A lot of times narrators are having to sort of help in this regard by turning down work and trying to find somebody more appropriate. And I think it's great for those narrators who do, but I think we all know that not all narrators do that. And so I do think there are still some people who kind of don't value authentic casting in general. And that obviously is like, I guess it's a personal thing, but I do think there's more work to be done there in all forms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that, oh, go ahead, Emily.
On the point of turning down work and having other people take the thing, this is very industry specific, but producers make choices about who they're casting for a number of different reasons. It's not just technical and representative and timing wise availability. There are other things that come into play too. And so it's great to turn down work if it's inappropriate for you. Absolutely. I'm not talking about that point. But to take on the role of then producer and trying to find other people to fill the role instead, I would say if that comes up to you and it's not an independent project, it's through somebody like Penguin Random House, you can turn down the work, let the producer know, and then talk with the producer and ask them if they want you to reach out and see if there's anybody else. Great, but that's their jurisdiction, that's their prerogative, right? So if you come out into social media or into anywhere and just say, who's available, I have a job that I just turned down, and that's not, I would be careful about that. So yes, encourage people to come in, right? And in general casting, but when you have a specific job that somebody's reached out for, that I would just talk to the producer before going out into social media.
That's when you'd also make sure, do you have your Ahab profile up?
Right.
And simple. Then you can just suggest to the producers, hey, look up this person.
I actually had a producer reach out for a job that was about gay African in Africa, and I said, I think we can find somebody better than me, somebody African, and I said, if you need help, I'll help. Let's do this. So, but it was to your point, Emily Lawrence. It was like the work isn't done, and part of being out with the identity is sometimes also being faced with, do I want to help educate, right? Do I want to help educate? And in that moment, I was like, yes, I'm going to help educate. I want to take this step. So, I reached out quietly to some people that I knew and said, hey, I need somebody who's an experienced narrator, who's, African and also queer and willing to be out as queer because of the nature of this book, which, living in Africa is going to be a big deal, right? A much bigger deal than it is here, at least in many of the urban areas where we find ourselves. So yeah, that work is still happening. I wanted to go back and ask the sort of from the opposite viewpoint, because we've all been talking about being very out with our identity and getting work and perhaps getting more diverse work, and Daniel, that you stepped in going, I want queer titles. Have any of you had the experience of feeling pigeonholed? This goes back to what sort of Vic was saying just a while ago, the opposite end. Have any of you felt pigeonholed by that and not given other things outside of your identifiers? Anybody? Or what's your experience been, rather, as opposed to couching it in the negative?
I feel very fortunate that I have not been. I mean, I still get a lot of specific titles that could relate to either any of my identities, but then I get a lot of titles that do not. And me, that's my personal thing. I love diversifying genres, subject matters, everything. that's a me thing. That's how I can keep everything fresh. So for me, I have not been, and I'm very grateful for that, because that's been one of my goals as an actor, once again, is to keep things as different as possible.
I have to say that my first queer romance only just happened last fall, and it was with Vic.
Dream couple.
And I don't think either of the characters were men of color, were they? They weren't.
No, they weren't.
Yeah, but they were queer. Anybody else on the subject? I will say the same thing as Vikas. I don't feel as though I've been pigeonholed, but I do feel that I have to, in general, that I have to educate people I have to educate producers and publishers to see me beyond how I first occur. And I think that's happened on camera, theater, whatever sort of, voiceover, commercial, whatever it is. That's in all realms. People get the first slice of you, and if you're successful in that first slice, then that's their go-to, because they've got a lot to do. And I found that it's been the onus has been upon me to go, hey, I know you see me as being very good at this, but I can also do this, and let me show it to you. Give me a shot,
And I actually want to dovetail on that too, and reiterate, yes, exactly what you are saying. My gateway was doing a lot of South Asian literature, and I did that for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And as I got to know people, same thing, I started speaking about what it is that I would love to do, and they were asking me what I would like to do. And I think getting to know me personally, once again, it's this business. It is, we always talk about, it's not who you are, it's who you know. It's who you know. And that translated not into who you know as in like, hey, you're going to give me a job. It's who you know personally, so that they know who you are as a person. So then they can go, oh, this individual can talk about social work and things like that, and I never would have known that about them, and so I've got this social work book that I can give them. But it was a journey. It didn't just happen immediately. I really wanted to emphasize that.
I can jump on a point, something you just said, Vikas, that really brought something up for me. One of my mentors, who's more on the film and TV side, said something that has stuck with me a lot, that you just activated for me. It's like, yes, it's who you know, but also it's who knows you. And once you start to have those conversations with a few people and get to have those personal relationships, everyone who they are working with and come into contact with might also come to know you, and you might get a book offer from someone you've never met, just because now they know a little piece of you because they know that person you know.
Yeah, I don't feel like I've been pigeonholed at all. I feel like I have a great array. I feel like part of my portfolio, as it were, is LGBTQ stuff, and I love it every time I get one. But I also, do all kinds of other nonfiction and all of that stuff. So I've been lucky in that I haven't been pigeonholed. But I also think it feels to me like the industry is trying not to do that like they used to do, maybe. So there's this kind of, it's like this like community-wide conversation that's happening that feels more organic than the theater world or Hollywood. It feels like everyone is now, not everyone, let's say not everyone, but a lot of the people who matter are in this conversation, not looking at it from the outside. And that is, I feel like, why the doors have just kind of swung open wider and more quickly in this industry than they are in the rest of the industry.
I kind of feel, what everyone is saying also resonates with Vikas and Dani are both saying in terms of like, it's who you know, but also who knows you. I think I came in with a very specific trans male identity. And so I do feel like I get a lot of that, but part of the job as an actor in whatever landscape we're in is also getting ourselves out there and letting people know about the different types of work that we do. So I think it can be really easy to complain about it or to have feelings about it. But I think what might be more productive, and this is something that I try and tell myself, is like, get yourself out there, like like let people know the other things that you do. And maybe, you know, I come from a production background, so I try to write stuff that I'm like, no one would cast me in that because they don't see that immediately, but that's what I would want to do. And that's what I would want to see. And so I'm fortunate to have that background. So I think in whatever ways we can try and like do the kind of dream thing, like whatever ways that we can let people know that we're capable of these other things, like do it, you know, try and come up with the ways and be creative. Also, just to say, before I knew Vikas, I heard Vikas in The Buddha and the Badass, which is this great like nonfiction book. And I heard his voice. I didn't even realize that was Vikas until like a year ago, which was amazing. I grew up listening to like, or reading motivational books, because that's what my dad would give me as a kid. He would give me like nonfictional, like power positive thinking, like books like that. And I just think about, wouldn't it be cool to have more like queer narrators narrating those books? Because how many of us have access to that information? When we think about casting, it's also about like, well, who's listening to that? Like as an audiobook listener, I get excited when I hear like, you know, queer voices in you know, in my ear, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And when it's like a genre like that's kind of unexpected in that way, I feel like it opens up more opportunity for our listeners to be able to access us talking about different things too. Because we have these identities, but there's so much more beyond like physical identity stuff. You know, it's also about like kind of what we think about and what we dream about. You know, it's just so many other things that I'd love to see. Like, I'd love to hear our voices in these other spaces as well. So just want to put that out there.
And you know, it that reminds me of one of the reasons why I find it important to tell these stories and to be who I am in that I think of, you know, I think of the queer person in some small town in Iowa who has no access to anybody queer that they know of. And so the audiobook is something they can do privately, and no one has to even know they're listening to it. And they're hearing stories that I never got to hear as a kid. And, you know, so to me, like that is, you know, I feel like I want to cry right now. Like that's why I do that part of it. Is for that person, for that trans person who doesn't even know they're trans yet, for those people to hear our voices. That's super, super important.
I mean, jumping on that, you said that one phrase that just shot me into the heart. It's so exciting to be able to narrate stories that I wish I'd had as a kid. And that goes to like every possible box that makes me the unique me that I am. But it's so powerful to be able to do that. And if you haven't had the opportunity, I wish nothing for you but to experience that, because when you're reading something and you're going, oh my gosh, my voice gets to bring these words to life, and this is what I needed to have as a child, to be able to move forward, to get to Tuesday. And
Has
yeah,
anyone
thank you
had
for
the
bringing that up.
experience? Has anyone had the experience? You're just reminding me, Vikas, so you all must have this, like when you're in the booth and you get choked up because there's something so deeply personal that comes up, and then your engineer starts tearing up. It actually feels so good. I'm like, I made the engineer cry. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm just
Or
gonna say,
educated them on a few things too. I've had that experience as well.
I'm just gonna say amen to those comments. I've had that experience of narrating something and thinking, wow, if I could have heard this as a child, it would have made me feel less alone. It would have made me feel better about who I was and less afraid. And it is incredibly rewarding and worth every risk of identifying very outwardly about who I am to have those opportunities.
Not
And
just as a child, as an adult.
Yeah.
I just feel like, the story is finally here.
True.
Oh my God. Oh my
but
God.
also-
Not anybody else.
But on that note, I record banned books. Just gonna say that. And I hope you all get to record banned books. And I hope that Those banned books are not banned anymore. Sorry, that's just my little.
I sometimes will on the subject, I'll sometimes say that, you know, when I was growing up, there were 3 books on gay people that you might find in the library if you lived in California. You know, like they just literally didn't exist. You know, only in special little enclaves could you maybe find like The Front Runner and, you know, and A Boy's Own Story, and that was it. I can't even think of a third one, frankly, of like fiction, you know. So there was, and in many places, that's still what's going on. You walk into those libraries as a 12-year-old and there is not anything that looks like you or what it is you think you might be feeling right now or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I think there's also a lot of diversity in, I mean, the reason there are so many letters in the LGBTQIA plus acronym is because there's so many different ways to be in part of that, of the queer community. And it doesn't all look a certain way. And it doesn't all, I mean, within gender exploration, there are so many different nuances within sexuality, within, I mean, any of that stuff, really. And so I think one of the beauties of having all of this new literature that we have now, and then also casting it with people who authentically understand that experience, is that, you know, my experience of being agender is not the same as somebody who's gender fluid, or not the same as probably somebody else who's agender, you know, like there is so much there. And the more of us who are able to bring ourselves to it, the more we can speak to that kid in Iowa, or, you know, the more that the world can come to understand the huge amount of different aspects and nuances of this stuff there are.
And hearing that actually just brought to mind, it's like, because once again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like, just because we are these boxes doesn't mean that it doesn't make us we're not limited. I think we're opening, if anything, because there's so many more experiences that we have. So I think it just opens up the doorways.
I love that. There is sort of a real sort of settling energy there with regard to like the embracing of, I don't know, the realness of that.
Realness.
You know? Yeah, the realness of all that. That's really wonderful. One of the other questions that had been submitted to the panel was, how can I go about narrating more positive queer content, LGBTQIA plus content? And I wondered if anybody has a response or a feeling to that question, where that question comes from, and how you would respond to it. Emily, Emily Lawrence, you immediately sort of nodded and your eyebrows went up. What's that?
What that brought up for me was the notion that not every queer story is a coming out story, you know, like not, especially nowadays when like thankfully more and more people are not having the painful, you know, coming out experience, and you know that it's, your families are not always kicking you out of the house, and that it is also, I mean, my favorite queer romance series that I've narrated, nobody came out, everyone was just gay, and it was wonderful, you know. And like and there was even like, it was a 3-book series, and the second book was 2 bisexuals, but one was a cis man and one was a cis woman, and they were both bisexual. It was still a queer story, but they ended up together, you know, it was their romance. And like that can happen too. Like just it doesn't, and again, this has more to do with, I guess, what gets written. And I do not want to devalue the importance of stories that do talk about our struggles, because that is so important. But I love just getting to narrate happy stories about people who happen to be gay, and it doesn't always have to be so angsty and sad. I think some of it should be. It is important to recognize our history and everything, but sometimes I just want to see people who I feel like are like me and are living happy lives, you know?
Or books that are just about something else that the main character happens to be gay.
Yes, absolutely.
Those are and I think we're moving there. You know what I mean? I think there is this, this continuum, as Shaan said, that idea that like it was this way before, and we're going to this other place, and we're somewhere in the middle. And I think we are in the muck of it all. And so it's exciting to see those kinds of stories that are just, I did when it was 250 pages in till I went, oh, they're gay, because that wasn't what the book was about until page 250. And then that became part of the thing. That excited me so much because I was like, oh, it's just a book,
I wasn't sure if I wasn't sure if that question had come from a place of, having the option or the right to turn down something if you felt that it was or being comfortable with turning down work if you felt that it was queer content, but it wasn't something that you felt that you weren't comfortable with, or wasn't representative of the community, or wasn't like, I'm sorry, I just don't want to tell another horrible angsty story about a gay person, I wasn't sure if the question was from that place of empowering us to go, you know what, that's not a story I want to tell, and I'm gonna give it to someone else, kind of thing.
I think I'm curious as to what constitutes and forgive me if this is not the exact wording in the question. What constitutes an LGBTQ positive story? Is that what it said? LGBTQ positive or more positive?
It's more, yeah. How do I narrate more positive LGBTQIA plus content?
And I guess I'm very curious as to what that means, because from my experience and everything I'm noticing, it has been positive.
Mm-hmm.
The content that I've been receiving, at least. So I'd be very curious to research what that means. What does positive content mean? And what does not positive content mean? Because sorry, Danny, yeah.
No, it's just as you were saying, the first thing that came to mind for me was like, I wonder if the questioner, if they're already a narrator, has had experience with the books who may have been written by folks who are outside of the community and not having these experiences, and may fall into this kind of bury your gaze trope or similar things. And so they're wondering, maybe how do I like actually narrate things by queer writers who are actively exploring things outside of this trope, and all the queer characters are not just props for the protagonist's journey, where it happens to be.
Because there are dark queer stories, you know what I mean, that aren't necessarily positive. Like, I want to be queer when you get to the end of this story, right? No, that's, you know what I mean? But they are, but in some ways, like I did this thriller, and it's like, oh, it's cool that there's a thriller that has to do with the community. That they're taking this genre of thriller, and and this writer is LGBTQ, and he's telling his story because he loves thrillers, and that's a great place. That's a great place to be working from.
I think if the question is like, I mean, look, we all know that there is content that gets published which is blatantly homophobic or transphobic or racist or any number of awful things. If the question is, how do I not narrate that? The answer is say no, turn it down. Just say no, this does not mesh with my personal beliefs. I am not willing to lend my voice to this content. That's okay. And if it's a publisher who repeatedly publishes that kind of stuff, don't work with that publisher. I mean, I know that not everybody is always in a position where they feel like they can turn down work, but at a certain point, it's not about, how can I narrate the kind of content I want to narrate? It's like, do I want to support that kind of content being in the world at all? And that's a really valid thing as a human being to not want to do.
Yeah.
And it's two sides of that coin, right? It's going no to this, and then taking the step that where we started off with, which is identification, going no, this is I don't want to do this, and this is what I want to do. This is who I am. I'm queer positive. I believe in happily ever after, whatever that is, but going, you know what? And that's what I want to do. Not this, but this. So, because it's just as important to constantly be saying what it is that you want, the world that you want to see, right? And the world that you want to be a part of creating, right? And so, and declaring that as loudly as declaring the no, declaring and bring this, right? I think. Speak for myself, actually.
When people ask me about, narrating, and I talk about it being like the upside down of the entertainment business, because casting directors here might give you a card and say, email me. Well, that never happens in Hollywood, things like that, right? But part of what is the upside down in this moment is the idea that they want to know what kinds of things you'd like to do. What Hollywood casting director is ever going to ask you that?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So be vocal about that. I wanna do books about algebra. Okay, great. We've got 7 of them. I'll get you one, right? Or whatever. So that's in this business, being a narrator, you might not get those jobs, but eventually you probably will get one in that genre, and then you might get another one, etc. But this is a different community that way, and the door's kind of open to saying what you want.
If you say you want to do books about algebra, you'll probably be the only one, and you will get all of them. And you'll be working for 3 years on books about algebra.
I want to be the go-to algebraic narrator.
But if you do algebra by queer mathematicians, that might narrow it down a little bit. I don't know.
Alan Turing's biography over and over and over again.
Algebraic?
Nice, good one.
I'm just like
Algebraic?
algebraic.
You all, we've been talking for an hour about this, and it feels like whoosh, it's gone by. I'm just curious if there's if anything has come up for anybody that they haven't had a chance to say, or that they want to mention more or bring to the fore, either about your experience as a queer or LGBTQIA plus narrator, or about that part of the industry. Anything else that has sort of popped up that you may want to share?
I'm just constantly in awe and gratitude. I've been receiving quite a few books on our history, on our queer history, and the strides and the challenges and the walls that have been torn down and fought for all of us to be able to be where we are right now. And I'm, the fact that, even 10 years ago, things were so different. And 10 years later, we're having this conversation on this open platform. And I am not concerned about, because for business purposes, for my career, for my being able to make my health benefits, I'm not worried that having my sexuality, being me, my unique me, is going to be detrimental. So I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful for all of you, and I'm grateful for our industry, and I'm grateful for what we have coming.
I think it's important that we uplift new and upcoming LGBTQIA plus narrators, that maybe even we step outside of our own comfort zone just a little bit to help those voices become part of the community, because that's how it happens. That kid in Iowa that I was talking about, maybe they want to be a narrator. how do they get here? Well, they reach out, however it is that they do that. But, I mean, I had amazing, LGBTQ mentors who taught me so much. I lived through the AIDS crisis. I, I, I saw so much devastation that I feel like it's my duty to make sure that future LGBT humans have a better world than those people who died so horribly, and that we, in a place of privilege, use some of that coinage to make sure that other people can join us, because I think there are going to just be more and more and more books that are LGBTQIA. So there's going to be just more work. So to me, that's super important. So anything that any of us can do to make sure that they're supported, I think is, I don't know, I feel the responsibility for that.
I think for anybody who's watching this who is both queer and not queer, it's okay to not always know the right thing to say. And it's okay to, I think even within the queer community, our understanding of a lot of stuff is rapidly evolving, and there are, like, a few years ago, it was not as okay to say queer even. And now that's like the accepted catch-all, it's like this stuff changes so fast. It's okay to be like, I don't actually know what is okay for me to say here, or like what are your pronouns. Like if you make a mistake, just own it and be like, I'm sorry, I'll try to do better. Like, I think that as long as, I know a lot of people, especially like in our current political climate or whatever, a lot of people are sort of afraid of misstepping or being seen as like intolerant or whatever. I think I am way happier to educate and whatever if people seem open to it, and so I think, rather than trying to pretend that you know all the answers, because I don't know all the answers, I don't think anyone does, when you're in a situation that maybe you're not totally sure about what something is, ask, and just be okay with getting it wrong sometimes, and have some humility, and we're all in this together.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I'm looking at that.
I'm looking.
Shaan, it looked like you were about to say something.
Feels like we're at closing thoughts kind of thing.
Yeah, it does feel that way. I think we should go with that.
I hate to open it back up, but I really do have this question, because I feel like, because Daniel, you mentioned for folks who are wanting to get into the industry, I'm curious if everyone can kind of popcorn a little bit and talk about, like, what are some resources that everyone has used to find work? Again, for me, I'm newer at this. I came in about a year ago, and I'm always curious, how do people even access or find, like, with on camera, there are multitudes of casting sites that I'm aware of. In the audiobook space, I know of one who we are, who has graciously helped set up this conversation for us with Ahab. And I'm curious, what are some resources that folks use to find the work that they do? Any resources we can share with our audience?
Anyone want to go? I mean, I think more so important than just signing up on Ahab. It's when you sign up for Ahab, is making sure you have as much information in that profile that is going to really showcase, I'm sorry, I'm using this, the unique you, because if they're looking for something, they have a search feature for the producers. And so putting as much information about yourself in there is one way, I think, and having, of course, good samples up. As for others, I think it's about really trying to get into the community, whether it's through Facebook and with some of the professional audiobook narrators communities. There is the Audiobook Publishers Association. That has listings for individual narrators. There is the New Professional Audiobook Narrators Association that is in its infancy, that is growing. There is jump in, anyone, if I'm Audiophile
You're doing
Magazine.
great.
Audiophile Magazine has, I believe, a listing for narrators. And it's a place right now, it's about getting yourself seen. Make sure you have a website. Make sure you have a website with your samples. That one is very important. Get on social media and follow the important people. I don't know, follow everyone here. Follow Ahab. Follow the production companies, the publishers, the producers. Follow the small producers. Find out who they are. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to, I can't think of anyone right now, but
Well, you said social media. People can follow us. Like, look, we're here. We're queer. We narrate. You can follow us and network with us, and we'll help you. Anything we can't think of now, we'll certainly funnel along to you. And I know Emily wanted to jump in here.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of that is just kind of understanding the audiobook industry, right? Going to networking events, meeting producers. There is also the indie. I don't know how much of this Ahab wants us to talk about, but there's also the indie side of things. There's ACX. There's, signing up for profiles there. There's a lot of ways to get work in the audiobook industry in general. In terms of for LGBTQIA actors, if you are trans, and in this definition, trans is an umbrella term which includes non-binary people, you can sign up for the T list, which is just generally for the film industry and entertainment industry. But I do know audiobook narrators who source from, or audiobook producers rather, who source from the T list. If you are a person of color, there's the PGM voiceover, which is a general voiceover thing for BIPOC voice actors. But I do know audiobook producers who source from that too. There's, like I mentioned, I created a list, which I know some audiobook producers who source from, so you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can send you that Google link. I mean, there are ways, but I think generally how to get work is get to be part of the industry, get to know people, network with producers, other narrators. We're very active on Facebook.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
This industry outside of audiobooks, it's a marathon. If you want to do it, it's not gonna, well, it may happen for some, and if that happens, wonderful for you. But be prepared for that. It's about once again, getting to know people and them getting to know you.
And, be vocal about who you are in those questionnaires. In Ahab, when you're filling out the profile, or if you get sent links from other publishers and you're filling out that Google spreadsheet, put every keyword you can possibly think of that represents you in those boxes. So I even sometimes put LGBTQ and then queer and then gay, because who knows which one they're searching.
Yeah.
Really you know what I mean? It's basic search engine kind of stuff, right? LGBTQ, gay, queer, algebra, but that's a part of it. You can't expect, partially legally, but the rest of it, you can't expect them to know those things about you or glean them. And they really do want to know. So put all aspects of you in every place you put yourself, in your social media, and your website, in those spreadsheets, everything you do, make sure you're always talking about all of you.
Thank you for sharing those resources. I feel like even for myself, I just feel like I got a master class in how to find work in the audiobook world. So this was great. And hopefully everyone can go forth and prosper, everyone listening to this too.
I will add one more resource. Both Emily and Vikas sort of refer to it, but both Penguin Random House and the APA, the Audiobook Publishers Association, have mentorship programs where they are very keenly looking to recruit people from BIPOC communities and queer narrators. And also the APA also has a new narrator workshop that they do periodically a couple of times a year, where they're specifically looking for people that are brand new or newish, right, that come from diverse communities. And so there's another resource. So
Wanted to ask, are those mentorships free for folks?
yes. Well, I don't know about
Okay.
paying random houses, but we
I'm
could
pretty
ask
sure,
them.
yes.
But
Okay.
but yeah, the whole idea of mentorship is in general, you know, paying it forward. And so yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
I was just 'cause I-
For the APA, you may have to be a paid member.
Yeah.
But after
Oh
that,
yeah. That's true. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Good to know. But as far as we know, the Penguin one is free. So.
Well, they'll be on Penguin. Oh, they've just told us
DRH
the
is
DRH one is
it is
totally free.
totally.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you. This has been so rewarding for me just to hear all your points of view, but also just to get to know all of you. This is, you know, other than when we sort of met a little bit last week, for me, this is the first time of interacting with some of you at any length, and it's just been a real joy. I'm very proud.
It's a wonderful way to kick off the day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving your time and for being so forthright and honest and vulnerable by being here and identifying as who you are and being willing to share it with the world and with this community. I'm really heartened and impressed and in love with all of you. Thank you.
I'm honored to be in all your company, for sure.
Yeah. So on that note, I will say thank you again. And you know, I think this should be a weekly series. I'm pitching for the weekly podcast, but until that time, we'll see you online and social media. And thank you all. It's been a wonderful morning.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all and everyone.
Bye.